Wait, that's the wrong intro. One of my regular viewers also happens to be an animator. Marcin Koźliński is also a stamp collector and a great patron to the YouTube stamp collecting community. You may have already seen his work on other stamp collecting channels. Marcin has graciously created an animation intro for this channel, and I'm so pleased with how it came out. So with that introduction out of the way, let's start this video over. Hi, I'm Ken. Marcin, thank you for creating that intro. You honor me by sharing your talents. You really help make my channel look a lot more professional. Anyway, thank you. Today we're going to celebrate the Olympics. I just love the Olympics, and I particularly enjoy watching unusual sports that you don't typically get to watch on TV. This year I loved the swimming and diving. For new sports, the speed climbing was really so much fun. Overall, the competition in Paris was fantastic, with lots of excitement and drama. With every Olympics, my wife curates a collection of dishes from around the world that we make and enjoy together, and I add to that a collection of drinks from around the world, and this year she built on the theme of World Dumplings. First, let's take a look at the various dumpling dishes, then we'll spend some time looking at Olympic stamps. I'll start here. This is the selection of international drinks I pulled together for the games. The Olympics run for a total of 18 days, and I think I have 21 options here. I didn't get to all of them. You can see a mix of beer in the back row. There's beer from India, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. There's a wine from Argentina and a Spanish sherry. There's a bunch of odd little nips from Mexico, France, Bermuda, Sweden, Ukraine, China, and even the Philippines. Let's not leave out the Korean soju and the Japanese sake. The Korean soju is peach flavored. I didn't have high hopes for that one, but it turned out to be a taste highlight. If you like cocktails, I think you might enjoy a little of that and some rye whiskey for a Manhattan riff. It wasn't all alcohol, though. You'll notice sparkling water from both France and Italy. Italy took the gold here, and there's that orange soda from Dominica, which had a slight tang flavor to it. Finally, there's that coconut milk drink from Thailand, which had little jelly cubes in it. It was actually not that bad. I still have a few things left to drink from this haul, but let's move on to the dumplings. Whenever we do Olympic cooking, we make a Greek dish on the first night and do a dish from the host country on the last night. We couldn't find a savory dumpling from Greece, but we did find a recipe for these spanakopita-inspired filled dumplings. The dumplings are the brown and green blobs. The white is a sour cream garnish. And of course, I had the Greek ouzo to go with this one. For each dish, I included a stamp from that country, or the best that I could for some countries I didn't have stamps for. You may have heard of extreme philately, where you take a picture of a stamp with the thing that it represents in the background. Let's think of this as extreme philately adjacent. Anyway, this stamp is a Greek Olympic stamp from 1992 featuring a javelin thrower. It seemed like an appropriate place to start. Next we have Namibian Damboli over chicken stew. I think that's water polo playing in the background. The stamp is from Southwest Africa. Prior to Namibian independence in 1990, stamps had the name Southwest Africa on them. Here I think we're due a bit of an explanation. Even before we started, we had a question about what constitutes a dumpling. The two most familiar to us were the Chinese dumpling and US-style dumplings. The Chinese style has meat wrapped in dough, which is either boiled in broth, steamed, or sometimes even pan-fried. This is a totally different kind of food from what the US calls dumplings, which are a flour-based dough boiled usually in chicken soup. Even at that, the US has a biscuit-like dumpling and a pasta-like dumpling, depending on the region you get them in. We didn't bother to make dumplings from China or the US since they're so familiar to us. But you'll see that the world has their own version of these styles, many of which are very similar to the US and Chinese-style dumplings. But bottom line, we started out understanding that there were two things we called dumplings, a meat-filled dough and a glop of dough, with the unifying factor being that they were typically cooked in soup, although even that wasn't universally true. This Namibian dumpling was dough-style, but the Greek dumpling was a filled-style dumpling. Moving on to Denmark, we had these Danish dumplings over a fish soup called mojaka. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that right. These were a good firm dough dumpling, which brings up the other dimension of dough dumplings, firmness. We had a whole range of dumpling firmness as we cooked different dumplings from around the world. This stamp is just a nice Danish stamp I had on hand, nothing special. These dumplings are from Mauritius and are called chokos dim sum. These break the soup mold. They were boiled but served over rice noodles instead of in soup. Very interesting and delicious. The stamp is also from Mauritius. It's a sports stamp but not themed on the Olympics. Close enough though. These are dumplings from Belize served over split pea soup. The orange flour is a nasturtium from our garden. Prior to 1973, Belize was the crown colony of British Honduras, and this stamp is from that period. These savory donuts are from Ghana. They're called pinkaso. They're kind of a stretch of the word dumpling because they're deep fried, but they're known as dumplings there, so we'll accept that. Indeed, that's the point of this international cooking, to experience how other cultures do and think about things. Next to it is a pretty nice stamp from Ghana, although I had very few to pick from. This stamp from Palestine goes with the Palestinian dumpling dish called shish barak. That was a pretty tasty dish, although it's a little sad to think about what the Palestinian people are going through right now. Here's hoping for a quick end to that conflict. These dumplings from Dominica are called Dumplings and are served in a thin cheese sauce. They had such an interesting texture, which I think comes from mixing the flour with warm water instead of cold. I don't have many Dominican stamps, but this butterfly stamp is really pretty. This dish is from Paraguay. It's called vori vori de polo, which is a firm, dry dough ball in chicken soup. Next to it is a common stamp from Paraguay that I happen to have in my collection. This was a yummy stew from New Zealand called a Maori boil-up. The dumpling is called a doughboy. These are exactly the same thing as the biscuit style of U.S. dumplings, a nice stew with a familiar dumpling. I liked this stamp because it features a kiwi bird. New Zealanders are sometimes called kiwis after this bird, not the fruit, although the fruit got its name from this bird too. In New Zealand, kiwi refers to the bird or the people. They call the fruit a kiwi fruit. This peanut stew from Congo is served with a dumpling called madombo. While these large dumplings are served with stew, they aren't cooked in the stew. Instead, they're steamed and added to the stew at the end. This Congo stamp is actually an Olympics stamp. I think the stamp is a little bit of a trick to the eye. It's oriented correctly in the picture, horizontally. That's a pole vaulter at the top of his jump. I think he made it. Here we have one of the most interesting dumplings of the whole series. This is an oromo from Kyrgyzstan. This really pushed our definitions. Think of this as a meat strudel which is formed into a ring and steamed, so not little balls and not cooked or served in soup. This was our favorite discovery of the Olympics. I've shown this stamp before. It's the best I could do. It's from neighboring Turkmenistan. I don't have any stamps from Kyrgyzstan. Well, actually not. This is a fake stamp that represents itself as being from Turkmenistan. They never issued this stamp, nor would the ultra-conservative country ever consider issuing such a provocative stamp. Here's another delicious stew with a kind of dry-doughed hard dumpling. It's bazin, or maybe bazin, from Libya. The stamp with it is from the period when Libya was a French colony. Here's another Olympic pole vaulter on a Canadian stamp. I think he's looking up thinking, how am I going to get over that thing? The soup is a Canadian cheese soup, and the dumpling is another doughboy, just like the New Zealand doughboy or the familiar U.S. soft dumpling. It was very good, but not very new to us. These boiled bread dumplings are from Croatia. They were a perfect lunch filled with pancetta and cheese. I really don't have many stamps from Croatia, but there is this one. I'm not really a fan of photographs on stamps. I don't know, I think of stamps as an engraved thing, not a tiny photograph. But I think this one works well enough. These Mexican empanadas came frozen from the grocery store. There's no rule that we had to make everything from scratch, although we did cook up those eggplants from my wife's garden. I think it's fair to call an empanada a dumpling, but it's a bit of a stretch. Mexico hosted the Olympics in 1968, and this stamp is from those games. You might be able to see 68 embedded in those Olympic rings in the top corner. These filled dumplings are from Georgia. They're called khinkali, and that's a summer squash casserole made from our garden summer squash. Both were delicious. Georgia's another country that I don't have many stamps from. This one is from before Georgia was part of the USSR. We always save the host country for last. These are quenelles from France. This dish was the biggest pain in the neck to make. French cooking is so fussy. Those dumplings are a combination of choux pastry and whipped fish. The sauce is a butter sauce made from a shellfish broth. So much butter. The recipe called for crawfish, but we substituted shrimp, which I think was just as good. The dumplings were the softest of all the dumplings that we made, and the sauce was so deliciously buttery. This was so good and still not worth the pain of making it. The stamp is one of my favorites. It's a sewer stamp from early France. It seemed like a good choice to end on. Hungry now? We ate really well during the Olympics. Leave a comment below if you have any dumplings you want to recommend that we should try. Now let's move on to Olympic stamps. We've covered a few of them with the various dumpling dishes, but there are so many more. I don't typically collect commemorative stamps, but the Olympics are such a frequent topic for stamps that I was able to pull together a whole bunch of them just from my files to give a pretty decent survey of the topic. Let's take a look at what I have. I do collect U.S. commemoratives, so it was pretty easy to comb through my album to find the U.S. Olympic stamps. These are the first Olympic stamps put out by the U.S. They came out in 1932. The modern Olympics started in 1896, so you can see that it took a while for the topic to get started in the U.S. The Winter Olympics that year were held in Lake Placid, New York in February, and the Summer Olympics were held in L.A. Back then, the Summer and Winter Olympics were held in the same year every 4 years. I like that we switched to having them alternating so we can enjoy them every 2 years now. Anyway, I suspect the only reason we came out with these stamps was that the games were being held in the US. The Winter Games stamp feature a skier, and the Summer Games show a runner and a discus thrower. The first Olympic Games were hosted fittingly by Greece. Greece released a whole set of stamps that year, but one of them stands out to me. This 5-lepton stamp from Greece also features a discus thrower. These two stamps are obviously based on the same sculpture. That sculpture is called Discobolus. The original was Greek, but it's lost to history, but we know it from many Roman copies, and these stamps. This is the next issue that came out featuring Olympics on U.S. stamps in 1960. Finally, in 1972, the U.S. came out with these stamps honoring Olympics that were in Sapporo, Japan. So these are the first U.S. stamps that honor Olympics that didn't happen in the U.S. I really like this design, and I'm reminded that these stamps came out when I was a young collector. So these are a part of my collection from a time when I was actively collecting, and I'm pretty fond of these stamps. This is the airmail version of that same design for the Sapporo Olympics in 1972. In 1976, the Winter Games were in Austria, and these are the stamps for those games. You'll notice I'm missing one of them. 1976 was late in my youth collecting, and I wasn't a very active collector during that time. So you can see that I'm missing one of these stamps, and that's kind of natural for the phase of my collecting at that time. So it's kind of interesting to see how my collecting habits changed by looking at these collections I'm going through. These stamps came out for the 1980 Olympics, another nice design from the US. And this is the airmail version of that same series. And these are the Winter Olympics versions of that same series. Here's the stamps for 1984. I was in college in 1984 and really wasn't collecting very much during that time. I do have some of these stamps, but really haven't had the time to go back and fill this in yet. And these are the airmail versions of that same series. I do happen to have all of these, which is nice. These stamps came out in 1992, or at least the two Olympic stamps on this page. There's the $1 Olympic stamp up in the top right, and the Eagle 290 Olympic stamp in the middle. This is the year that the U.S. Postal Service sponsored the Olympics, so those are why those two stamps came out. I have on a different page in my album this really high-value Olympic stamp from that same year, $9.95. This is quite a nice stamp. Here are stamps for the Summer and Winter Games in Calgary, Canada and Seoul, Korea from 1988. This little stamp also came out with those other stamps the year the U.S. Post Office sponsored the Olympics. So that one stamp in the middle, that one regular issue flag over stamp. You can see it kind of sitting on a page that I group with other flag over stamps. For a long time, the U.S. issued a bunch of different, what I call flag over issues, and this was just one of them. These stamps were issued in 1990 honoring different eras of Olympians, and not really honoring the Olympics, but more the Olympians that ran into it. I think it's interesting. These came out in a strip, and Scott decided that the right way to mount them on this page was in this vertical format. I think this is kind of awkward. Compare it to this page, which is the same exact format, 5 stamps that came out in a long strip. But in this page, Scott decided to orient them horizontally on the page. And you can see that last stamp over there, you can't even see it in the crease of the album. And so I can see why they chose to make the other one go vertical, and this one horizontal. Just doesn't work for me. And this is pretty much where my commemorative album ends and where my stamp collection ends of U.S. commemorative stamps. I think these are the last Olympic stamps that the U.S. put out. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, they're the last I have for the 1992 Olympics. You can see again these strips of 5 stamps kind of falling into the edge of the album itself, and I think maybe these belong going vertically on the page. I don't know. Nothing to do here. You just have to kind of follow what the album does or make your own pages. Now we're looking at some world stamps, and these stamps come from Great Britain. These ones in the middle are celebrating the 1948 Olympic Games. These 3 stamps are from Belgium. They're celebrating the 1920 Olympics. This is a selection of Olympic stamps I have from Hungary. You can see all kinds of different Olympic stamps, and Olympics are a pretty popular topical region. I think we've seen that before, and you can see that Hungary kind of leans into this topical collection. I think these are really lovely stamps, but it's pretty clear that Hungary is making stamps for collectors, not just in their Olympic stamps, but in a lot of stamps you'll see birds and flowers and other things that are of interest to topical collectors. I think that's why they've issued all these different Olympic stamps. That said, I don't think Hungary has more Olympic stamps than the US, so in some sense you can think that in those mid-years of the US, they were doing the same thing as Hungary was doing. And in fact, during the 80s, the late 70s, and the 80s and 90s, the US just got nuts with issuing all kinds of stamps, making it kind of abusive to collectors, in the same way that someone might think that Hungary or other other countries issuing a lot of stamps for collectors were being abusive to collectors. Anyway, nice stamps. These are from Hungary. I think we can move on. These are stamp series from Laos. Again, we see multiple series of Olympic stamps. I think these were also issued to take advantage of topical collectors, which, it's fine. People love to collect Olympic stamps, and these are pretty nice stamps. These are stamps from Mexico, and you might recognize that one in the bottom center as the one that I showed with the dish. Mexico hosted the Olympics in 1968, and you might be tempted to think that because there are so many different Olympic stamps that Mexico was again taking advantage of that topical market, but that's not what's going on here. What we have here are 3 different series of stamps, although I don't have all of them, happening in different years, advertising those 1968 Olympics. That sheet at the top is one that came out in 1966 to celebrate the Olympics or advertise the Olympics coming out 2 years later. The one in the bottom left that is ripped, a terrible stamp in my collection, that one came out in 1965, also recognizing and advertising for the 1968 Olympics. And this set here came out in 1967, celebrating the upcoming Olympics in Mexico. So anyway, here we have Mexico across multiple years releasing different stamps, honoring and encouraging people to get excited about the Olympics. So I don't have any problem with these at all. These stamps, on the other hand, are from Poland, and you can see tons of different stamps here. We've got a series along the top. We've got a series along the right. I think there are maybe 5 different series represented here. I do not have a complete set. But again, Poland is releasing stamps for the collecting market, trying to get people excited about Polish stamps by offering good topicals. These are great stamps in terms of a topical collection, but they're not probably stamps that got used very often inside of Poland. Another big country that releases stamps with lots of topical collection appeal is Romania. And you can see these lovely, really lovely diamond-shaped stamps at the top. Nice series representing Mexico here in the middle right. And along the bottom is a really nice series of stamps. So there's a good job that Romania has done here, making stamps featuring the Olympics for essentially supporting the topical collector market. I added these in the middle here. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with these ones in the middle, but you'll notice that there are chess pieces on them and Olympic rings. I think these are not celebrating the Olympic Games per se, but celebrating the Olympics of chess, which I think is just really fascinating. This use of the Olympic rings to celebrate chess playing. So I think that's really fascinating there. Not Olympic Games focused, I think, but Olympic chess playing I think is what's going on there. These are stamps from Russia. Russia also put out a fair number of stamps for the topical collector market, although no worse than the US or anyone else in that regard. Russia has a big contingent in almost every Olympic Games. Here's a nice set, mostly from 1964, although the bottom one is celebrating again that Mexican 1968 Olympic Games. Nice stamps from Russia. Even though these stamps say Mexico on the top of them, they're celebrating the Mexican Olympics that we've talked about a couple of times. These are from Yemen. I believe these stamps are probably never actually issued in Yemen. These were made completely for the collector's market. So a lot of countries in the Middle East issued stamps for the collector market, but never really released them in their own country. I think these are part of that set. So you'll see a lot of those coming up here in just a minute. Here's another set of stamps. These are from Bulgaria. Bulgaria is another country that typically puts out a lot of topical stamps for collectors, although don't really have a lot of these. So not as big as some countries, but Bulgaria puts out a fair number of these, and these are pretty nice stamps, I think. Here we have two stamps from Canada. Canada hosted the Olympics in Montreal in 1976, and these are part of that, celebrating that Olympic Games. And these are from Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia, another country that just puts out a ton of stamps for the collector market. Although these, again, are pretty nice stamps for the Olympic theme. I can't quite figure out what's going on in that bottom right stamp. That's featuring the 1968 Mexican Games again. But notice those carvings, sculptures, mimicking the diver in some way. I'm not quite sure what that's meant to be doing, but it's kind of a little bit creepy and a little bit interesting. These are from countries all across the world. Just little stamps I had that kind of rounded out my collection just to show how broad the Olympics get celebrated in countries. We've got Dubai, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Liberia, and Iran. And finally, this sheet, this is our last sheet we're going to go into, are, again, those stamps from the Middle East that are for the collector market only. None of these were released in their own countries. Maybe they were released there but never used. I'm not exactly sure how this works. Anyway, you can see, I'll just kind of go across the top. The first is from Al Quwain, a country that I think is now part of UAE. That's actually rectilinear stamp, so if you move it, it changes. It's like triple thick. I don't think you could even stick it to a letter very effectively. The ones on the top are from Ajman. Those are now part of UAE. Again, they never released those in that country. Then we've got the country of Ras Al Khaimah, I think is how you pronounce that. Same deal. These are stamps that are made completely for collectors. There's more of those along the bottom here, Ras Al Khaimah. I think it's really interesting in these two on the bottom left that they're both topical as Olympics and topical as flowers. So they're hitting the market twice with these two stamps. Again, there's no connection between a rhododendron and a speed skater, or between a dwarf quince and a downhill skier. But there you go, two collector markets with the same stamp. These tiny ones in the middle left are from a place called Ajman, and also from a city in Ajman called Manama. Again, these stamps, there are lots of these little stamps from this one Middle Eastern city that's now part of the UAE, but these were never really available for postage anywhere. Anyway, this is kind of an interesting way that countries made revenue from their postal system. I don't particularly like these as a collecting model, but I think people really do like topical collections. And so if these fill a place in your collection and you love them, but by all means, please collect this kind of thing. I think that question of what do we collect is a very personal one, and who am I to complain about how you choose to collect? There are really a bunch more Olympic stamps, and we could be here all day going through them. Many people make this their whole collection, a topical collection. These were just the ones that I have in my collection, and like I said, I don't even really collect these. Seeing them all together like this, though, maybe I should start a topical collection on Olympics. I don't think so.